All right. Can you confirm everybody can see my slides and hear me okay?
Yep, we're good.
All right. Good. All right. So thanks to Maggie for the invitation to talk today. Today we're going to talk about a topic I'm pretty passionate about, and that's the use of no-code and low-code custom visuals in Power BI. My name is Pat Mahoney. I have an intro slides. Let me just cover that instead. I'm formerly trained as a chemist. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for over 25 years and have always had a passion for data. Didn't really know it was called business intelligence at the time. And over time have shifted my career in that direction. Got very involved in the Power Platform communities. For a brief shining moment, I was a data platform MVP. And then I had the opportunity to join the CAT team, which earlier this year I did, and it's been awesome. And I also have some content out there on YouTube and a blog, mostly YouTube, under the name Hoosier BI, and I mostly talk about Power Query or DAX and modeling or custom visuals like what I'll talk about today. So I thought I'd start with just some thoughts on when somebody might need to use custom visuals. One thing I like to say is, visualization is for show and analysis is for dough. I'm also a big DAX fan. So it's kind of ironic that I'm talking about visuals, but there's definitely is a place and a need for those. But definitely encourage people to, use the simplest visual that you need to get the insight that you're looking for. And a lot of times a simple table or matrix with the right DAX expression, can really surface, where do I need to take action or what's the thing I need to notice. And whenever the native visuals do work for you, definitely encourage you to use those, for simplicity and performance. There is some great stuff coming in the visual space. If you're following that, you may have seen some previews of what's coming. So the stuff I'll show you today, you'll need less of it over time if you decide to start using it. But it'll always be there in your toolbox if you learn to use these tools. So the main reasons I've seen or I've needed to create custom visuals is, sort of three buckets. One is, hey, there's a specific visual that I need, right? And that's the only way I can get to the insight I need. Or I really want to build something that's really unique and grabs people's attention and therefore get them to take the needed action. Or I hear this one a lot of, we're moving from a different tool. And boy, our executives, we sort of trained them to use this other chart and we really liked it. And I'm not able to reproduce it with the Power BI native visuals. And so that's another frequent use I've seen. There are some limitations with the native visuals. We'll talk about those in the demo that I'll give today. But these two and other people, sometimes when you have a big data set or you're using direct query, you can definitely see poor report page performance if you've got too many visuals on a single page, or if you've got some complex DAX going against a direct query source, for example. I'll give you a couple of examples of how you can leverage these visuals to improve performance as well. And sometimes you just need to do more advanced analyses, usually statistical analysis. And for those, you're going to use the R or Python visual because, if you've ever tried to do like a simple regression with DAX, it's an embarrassing amount of DAX that you need to write to pull that off, right? So there's lots of visuals out there. I'm going to talk about three today, really two, and mostly about Deneb because I think it's the most powerful of the bunch. You can definitely keep them all in your toolbox, but if you're only going to learn one, I probably would recommend Deneb. So this is a slide I like to show. This is something I've made mocked up from a slide I've seen by Daniel Marsh-Patrick, who's the creator of the Deneb visual. And this sort of shows the spectrum of the types of visuals that you have available to you in Power BI. You've got you should start with the simplest one that you can if it meets your need. But, in the no code space, you've got the native visuals. You can click on the ellipsis and go get more visuals. And there's a whole bunch there to choose from. And most of the time, these should meet your needs. Today, we're going to talk about the Plotly.js visual, which is also a no code visual. It can also be used as a low code visual. but it's very powerful and has a lot of flexibility, and again would be a good thing to try if you've exhausted the first two. Charticulator, I'm going to talk about at the end if there's time. I'm concerned about running out of time, so we may not get to it. I really like Charticulator. It is no code. There's a couple things like when you're doing format strings or whatever, it can be a little tiny bit of code, but it is a really unique building experience, which I really like. Some people get frustrated by it, but we've heard recently that Microsoft is going to continue to support Charticulator, but is not going to continue to develop it. And again, it works well now. I definitely encourage you to check it out if it meets your needs. There are some things that it does that the other ones can't do. But Deneb continues to be improved, and there's a lot of activity on it, and definitely encourage you to do that. And then again, when you need to get into the more advanced things over here, then R and Python are always there to do that. And I try to make a little joke here. You've got no code, then you get into the low code space. You can make your fully owned custom visuals, which is considered low code. You'll see a bunch today of what I jokingly call faux code. It's stuff I find online and modify, which is one of the advantages of these low code visuals is, they're using platforms that exist outside of Power BI. In Deneb's case, it's Vega Lite. And of course, R and Python are out there that people have been using for a very long time outside of Power BI. So you can go and find code from a much larger pool of people than just within the Power BI space, which is significant on its own. Just a couple more slides, and then we'll get to the good stuff, the demo. I made this slide. Ironically, I made it in Excel versus a custom visual. But this is sort of a list of features that I like to point out about these different visuals and which one you might use for the job. And, an X means it can't do it, and the number of green checks means how well it does it. And then I shaded in green, which one I think sort of is the winner in that space. People may disagree. But as you can see, Deneb kind of has the most green, but there are some things that like Charticulator does better than the other platforms, and would be my choice for something if I had to do a visual that had links, for example. Again, the good news is all of these are free and certified. You can pin them all to your Power BI desktop. That's what I do, and you don't have to choose just one. So hopefully I can raise awareness of these in this talk today, and you'll decide to pursue them and keep them as part of your toolbox. I can share the slides after the talk in the chat, but I have a list of links here. I'll show you a few of these, sort of the documentation and/or gallery sites where you can just get inspired by what's possible with these. And then for each, I've got at least one link that is a good starter, or what I point people to that are just starting to learn it. So this one here is a YouTube video by with Daniel Marsh-Patrick, who created Deneb, and that he walks through all the history of it and a good demo of it. I like this video by Kerry Kolosko, who does an awesome job with Deneb, but also this is a good video on Plotly. And then on Charticulator, there's a good YouTube video or a series that I point to, as well as a really good blog series by Burning Suit. All right, so let's jump over and do some demo. First, I want to show you just these. So these are some of the links that I had on the previous slide. So again, we're going to talk about 3 visuals today: the Plotly.js visual, Deneb, and Charticulator. And so for each of these, there's and again, Plotly's been used within R and Python and JavaScript for a long time. And again, there's a ton of code out there that you can leverage and adapt for whatever your need is. And this is the Plotly.js gallery. So again, you can scroll through here and see what types of graphs are possible. So these are all things you could, pretty easily add to your Power BI visual. And then if you click on each one, you'll see one or more examples of code that, again, you could borrow to make that specific visual in that tool. Got 2 tabs here for Deneb. The first one is just the link to the GitHub repository for Deneb that Daniel Marsh-Patrick runs. And there's a whole bunch of great stuff here to get started, walking you through a simple example, that kind of stuff. So this is specific to the Power BI visual that's based on Vega Lite. And so if you get into using Deneb, there's this example gallery here and this documentation site that you'll use heavily just to see all the parameters that you have available to you if you choose to create the visual that you're trying to do. And again, you can come down here and see all the types of visuals. This is a pretty long page, and the really cool stuff is at the bottom. But all of these are good. And again, if you click on these, you'll see the JSON code. Vega Lite is coded in JSON. You can just see all the stuff that's possible, right? So it's, small multiples and that kind of stuff. I'm trying to get down to some of the interactive stuff, which is really cool. This is one I'll show later, that I sort of modified the code where, based on where you are in the visual, it recalculates all of the values relative to whatever month is highlighted there with the red line, right? So again, very snappy performance and on the fly, in visual calculation there. There's also some kind of stuff where, like, if you look at this one, you can have this sort of double visual and use this to pan and zoom and that kind of stuff. And again, the code is all there, not much code. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then, you also will come here to look at the documentation where you say, hey, I'm creating a visual and I need to, you can come here and see what's possible. So there's all sorts of transformations you can do with the data inside the visual. We'll talk about that. There's all sorts of marks you can use. If I wanted to say I'm making a bar chart and I would look at the documentation and it would show me the syntax that I need when using that, as well as a list of all the properties that I have available to, change the orientation or the alignment or the corners of the bars. I can round them, that kind of stuff. And again, you can see examples frequently of full charts there that, again, you can leverage the code from here to get exactly the look or functionality that you're looking for. Okay. And then the last one is the Charticulator gallery. And this one is kind of neat. Again, there's some getting started info, that kind of stuff. And then there's this gallery, and the first part is a chart. It shows you the chart and the video, and then down below you just see even more charts, chart only. But you can see some of these things are really cool, how they look, and these videos are kind of cool. I'll click on this one because it basically provides a video, and all these are like 2 or 3 minutes long. And it'll just walk through how to build the visual. And so you can see, exactly what you need to do. And so when I first started learning, I followed some of these videos, and it was really helpful to see how to do it. And you can see just in a very quick amount of time, you're able to build something really cool. So I encourage you to check out this site and see these videos. All right, so let's move over to Power BI and do some demo here. I think I covered most of these points in the PowerPoint. I will say I'm definitely a function over form person, so this isn't going to be pretty, but I hope it's practical for you and shows you the functionality. But please know that many people have already made beautiful visuals with any of the tools that I'm talking about. And so don't judge the tools by the charts that I show. Again, I'm focused on the functionality. I think that's all I wanted to show. Yep. All right, so if we just start with a native bar chart in Power BI, and again, this may totally meet your need, which is awesome if it does. It's really easy to create. You don't need to do any coding. If you do a measure, then you've got to use the code in the DAX, of course. But I can add, data labels here, the numeric values for that measure, and I've got lots of options to format this, right? But people coming, they're new to Power BI or they're coming from other tools. They quickly get stuck on a few things. Like if I try to say, no, I want to have a text label here, right, instead of a numeric value. I want to put product C on the bar and not here. You can't do that. Or if I write a measure and I want to use the measure as my legend or on my axis, for example, and I'll show you examples of this, but you can't do it. Okay. So the first visual I'm going to talk about is the Plotly.js visual. And I just got, the little prefix here, P, D, or C for Plotly or Deneb or Charticulator. And you can see that I'm only going to do one report page on Plotly just to introduce you to it and show you the interface. And then I've got a whole bunch of stuff on Deneb. And then if I have time, I've got some examples on Charticulator as well. Okay. So if I go to the Plotly.js visual, all the ones on this page are made with Plotly.js. And I'll just start by showing you the interface. So sort of out of the box, here's the kind of stuff you can do. It comes out of the box with this kind of neat functionality here where you can zoom in on stuff. So if I do this kind of thing, sorry, that wasn't it. Sorry, I wanted the zoom tool there. So I just care about these, that kind of stuff. I can double click and go back. I can zoom in and zoom out. And then with all three of the visuals I'll show you today, they have the same kind of interface where you add, the fields and measures to the visual, and then you come up here, click the ellipsis, and then hit edit. Okay, and so then you get this interface. And the nice thing about Plotly.js, if you look in the visualization panel for Power BI, you get all these choices for native visuals. And if you come here in the Plotly and you say, hey, and you can add multiple traces, but if I just go and say I want to modify this trace, if I click here, you can see all the types of charts that come out of the box with the Plotly.js visual, right? So if I wanted this to be a scatter chart or whatever, or a 3D or a box and whisker kind of chart or whatever, it's really easy. So it's like getting a whole second visualization panel, all within one visual. Okay, and then here you can select which fields you want to have on your x-axis. You can pick more than one. And you've got a bunch of settings you can choose there. Like I said, you can add multiple traces here, and then you can also do stuff like this where you can create subplots. So say I want to make two charts side by side. I could add, one trace and make it this big, and then I could add a second trace and put it over here, or I could, keep this one full size, and then I could make a small one and have like an inset chart if I wanted to. And again, all of this is no code, so I'm not going to, demo too much on this because I think it's very intuitive just to get in here and start playing with it and see what you can build. You can also do some transformations within the visual itself. So far I've added a split, but if you click here, there's other ones I can filter the data, which normally you'd probably filter it outside the visual, but say you made side-by-side visuals and one you wanted filtered or one you wanted aggregated or sorted a different way, you could do that and have side-by-side visuals that had a different level of granularity, for example. In this case, I just did a split, so that I could color category 1 and category 2 into different colors as a simple example. And then there's all sorts of settings here, and you just tick through there for how you want to style stuff, the text, that kind of stuff, the titles, that kind of stuff. Similarly for the trace, you can come down here and like I added the product field. So again, I wouldn't have been able to do this in the native visual, right? To put the name of the product here, and if I went to the axis, I could remove the axis so that it just showed up here. I could change the orientation of it. And again, just lots of options there. So I encourage you to check out this visual and go through all the options and see what's possible. You can also do annotations. You can add text or shape or images. So, I added this annotation here. You can also do it in HTML if you want to get fancy. So if you needed to put some instruction or something to point out on the chart, you have that option as well. The big thing to point out about this visual is if you come in and build your visual, then you go back to report, you'll actually lose everything you made. You actually need to come here to the JSON and click on save for it to save your visual. Now, this is also the interface where this would go from a no code to a low code visual, and you can actually modify the code here, or you can copy it out to a clipboard, give it to someone else, and you can actually share content with other people that go, hey, I really like your visual, but I'd like to use it with my data. You could actually come here and copy this and give it to them, and they could modify it as well. And this is also where you could modify the code with code you found in the Plotly.js gallery, for example. So the big thing to remember with this is to save your JSON, because otherwise you'll go back and the report will be empty. Okay. But just a couple other things to show with this one. I won't go into the interface, but this visual here is using a measure. I call it HML sales. If I click on that measure, I'll use this several times in the demo. You can see here it's just a simple switch true kind of measure where, if the sales are less than a certain amount, call it low. If not, the next tier is medium, and the default is high there. But if you were to try to use this in a native visual, you couldn't do it. So all of the visuals I'll show you today, it's possible to use a measure on the axis or as a legend or on a data label or whatever, right? So that's a useful feature, as I'll show in a couple of different pages. And this one just is, again, this is instead of just a stack chart or a clustered chart with the Plotly.js, I made a stacked and clustered chart, right? So pretty powerful. All right, so that's Plotly.js. I'm going to switch now and talk about Deneb for a while. Again, I think this is the most powerful one, and the one that I've turned to mostly when I needed to help people convert from other visualization tools. Or build something that they, just needed to. The native visual wasn't cutting it for them. So just to show you a little bit about the Deneb interface. Again, it's you get it from AppSource, right? Then you create the visual. You add your fields and measures to it. Again, once they're in the visual, it treats them all similar. That's why you can use measures, anywhere, but then you go into the edit interface, and this is just sort of the out-of-the-box bar chart that you can make, and you can actually, when you first create the visual, it'll give you like several templates that you can choose from, and this is one of those where it, again, but this is a good way to learn. It automatically generates this part here where the data, so it's just saying, hey, use the data that has been passed into the visual. And then, you define one or more marks, which is, for every row of data, I want to have a bar, or I want to have a point, or a circle, or a square, or an arc, or there's a whole list of things on the documentation page for that. I'm turning on the tooltip, so when I hover, I see the value, and then you have to, specify the encoding for the mark to say, hey, this is what I want the Y value to be encoded. This one is a categorical field, which is called nominal in Deneb, and I want to use the product field that I passed into it. I want to sort it descending according to my X-axis value. My X-axis is my total sales measure. It's a quantitative, so it'll create that linear scale there. And out of the box, it also gives you this opacity stuff. You could delete this and you don't need it, but that's what gives you this functionality. When you click on it, it makes the other bars a lighter color. One of the nice things that comes in handy when you do some of the more advanced features with Deneb is it also has this preview pane here of the data that you're seeing there. So you can actually do in-visual calculations, and you can see extra columns or things that you've done, or if you've done an aggregation or something, you can see the data to confirm that it's doing what you expect it to do. Okay, but this is the syntax. It's JSON, and it's leveraging the Vega Lite language. So if you make a mistake and I put an extra comma here, you get some help here. I got an X here. and it tells you the line that it's on, and it says, hey, that's not valid JSON. Or if I, use a term that Vega Lite doesn't recognize, right? So I called tooltips instead of tooltip. You get this here, and it'll say, this. It's sort of a warning, not an error, but and then it may or may not work when you go to do it. And then you can, this will format the code for you. So I usually use this button here where I'll format it. And then, you also have the option to say I make a really nice visual, I can export that and share it with others, and then they could import it, and it would, they would just have to sort of map their fields to the visual. So it's a really nice experience there. They would get this type of an experience. So once you export the template, they would import it, and they'd say, okay, my category is called, company here, and my measure was called this, and then you'd apply the mapping, and the visual would just work for them. So it makes it real easy to share. So that's what's sort of out of the box. And just to show you, and again, this isn't beautiful, but hopefully it'll show you that you've got a lot of degrees of freedom to make something that looks really nice. So if I go in and edit this one, you can see, it's the same chart, but basically, and there's 66 lines of code here. But once you start learning Vega Lite, you'll see the patterns, and you'll quickly learn how to build stuff out. So in this case, I'm actually layering three marks together. So I'm using this layer functionality, and I've got a bar, and I've got two text things. And so I'm layering those all together. They each can have their own independent encoding, and then you can also have shared encoding outside of it. So again, this isn't a teaching seminar, this is just for awareness, but it's not a ton of code, and the pattern repeats itself. And one thing that's really nice about this as well is, you can collapse the parts and say, oh, I'm really working on this third mark, right? And I just want to ignore that for a little bit. You can collapse and expand that all you want, or I want to get rid of the whole layer, and I'm really focused on the encoding part, or vice versa, or whatever, right? And so as you work with it, you'll learn how to build this out, and really do some really cool stuff. All right. So let's keep going. And so I'm going to show some functionality stuff here. This one is a fairly common use case that's out there. I see it in the community. Is people, it's pretty straightforward with the native visuals to do a top-end visual. I want the top 10, top 5, or whatever, and add a filter to the visual, and it works. But often people will want to have this others calculation where, I want to see the top 3 in this case, and then I want everything else added up as others. And I want it to sort this way so that the top one is at the top and the others, isn't the top one. And there's good like blog and videos out there, like SQL BI has a great walkthrough of how to do this using DAX, but that requires you to do some additional modeling, adding a column or a table to your model so that you have this others field available, because you're not able to add a measure, to use a measure on your axis in the native visual. Well, that's not a limitation with Vega Lite or Charticulator or Plotly.js. And so, in this case, I've got this measure here, top 3 other, and it basically calculates this here. It says, hey, figure out what the top 3 products are. And if you're one of those top 3, return the name of the product. Otherwise, call it others. And then inside the visual, I can aggregate, sum up the values for whatever the value is in top 3 other. And so these 3 get added together, and I basically provide it with a table of 4 rows of data, and that's what's used in the visual. Okay. So that's sort of the first way to do this in Deneb, but it requires you to do several measures here to be able to pull that off, to get the sort right, and to generate the measure for this. It's also possible to do it completely inside the visual. Right. So whereas that one had, these 4, this field and these 3 measures, this one has just 2. It has the field and the sales, and it also has this cool thing. And this is part of the Vega Lite functionality where they have these things called parameters, well, you can actually generate some user interaction here. So I can sit here and go, I just want n equal 2, 3, 4, and again, it's very responsive, and it provides another, again, place where you can give your user some functionality there. And if I go into the spec here, you can see, I've set some height and width for the visual. I want it to be a certain size. I have this parameter syntax where this is where I'm generating this slider and I'm giving it a starting value and a range, but then I can leverage whatever the selected value is down in there. I can use some other transform functions of Deneb. And again, there's some learning curve here, but it's well worth it in my opinion, where I can first generate sort of a rank column in the data using this window function, and it has a set operator of rank. So I'm generating my rank thing. And if I come over here, I can preview the data, and you can see here I've generated this rank column inside the visual, as well as I've got this field calculated column basically inside the visual called new label. And I basically do the same kind of thing that I did in my measure, that I say, hey, if the current rank for this product is less than or equal to n, then give me back the product. Otherwise, call it others. And then I'm just using this new label field down here as my y-axis. And then I'm still doing, I'm doing an aggregation on sum and adding up my total sales. So again, I get that same visual again, but it's now dynamic, and the user can choose the top end value. Okay. All right. So that's using measures in your visuals. Real quick one here is, if you've built many Power BI reports and you've got used the table or matrix visual, it can be a little bit of a frustration to try to change the height of the rows, the width of the columns. And so you can also build a matrix visual with Deneb. You can also do it with Charticulator. And if I resize it like this, it's automatically changing the size and things, and I can really quickly get to the look I want or the size I want without having to change all my column widths or having them auto size, and I lose what I did there. And you can also fix them as well. So if I wanted to fix the height or width of those things, I could do that. And then if I change the size of it, it would just add scroll bars to the visual so that people would scroll. So you can get the effect that you want. Okay. And again, this is a pretty simple, they're called specs in this. So the JSON code behind the visual is called your Vega Lite spec. And, again, I'm just layering a rectangle, right? And I don't want it filled, and I want a black outline for it, and then a text. So I could also put multiple text values here. I could concatenate it with text. I could do, lots of things and put a lot more information inside each of these squares if I wanted to. And then my encoding is just, product by year, and it makes the grid for me, right? So again, lots of, it's just really kind of limited by your own creativity. Deneb also has some great functionality for doing small multiples and actually just concatenating completely different visuals together. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But this is, just using like the repeat functionality where I basically have, if I go into the spec here, I create a chart that I like, right? So I've got my spec down here of the chart, and then I say, hey, I want you to make the same chart, and I want you to repeat that spec for both measures that I've added into my visual. So I've got a sales and a quantity measure here, and then boom, I've got my my small multiple there by measures. Typically, you'd have to do that with calculation groups in Power BI to pull that off. You can do small multiples by fields, but in this case, I'm doing it by measures. You could do that with field parameters too now. And then this one is a little more advanced one where I'm doing two things, where I'm using the repeat again, but I'm also using a faceted chart. And so in this case, I'm repeating by the two measures, but before that, I've faceted the chart by year. So I've got small multiples by year, and then I've repeated that for two different measures. And so I get this nice grid of visuals here, right? And so there's tons you can do. I've mentioned the parameters before, where again, you can bind lots of different things. This is kind of a silly one where I'm just changing the label of the, the angle of the label to that. You probably would never do that, but it just shows you, you can bind properties to these user interactive parameters here. And this is an example of what that code looks like. And then this is another one I like to use where you can get with just this little bit of code here, you can get this nice zoom and scroll. So I'm just scrolling my mouse and I'm zooming in and out, or I'm dragging with my mouse, and I can get this, this pan and zoom functionality. And you can add this to just about any visual pretty easily once you know the pattern. All right, so let's talk about performance and in visual calculations, because I think this is a really good use case for Deneb. So this is the one I showed from the gallery, and in that case, it was whenever you would hover the mouse, it would recalculate. I've modified the code that I found so that I just have to click, and again, it's recalculating the values relative to wherever I click, the month and year. And if I go into the spec here, you can see, there's some parameters there where again, you're defining like an index of where you're clicking. It's using the select parameter where it's basically wherever I put my mouse down, then I want to grab whatever that X value is, in this case, the month and year, and that kind of thing. And then it does some calculations. And again, I couldn't have come up with this on my own, but I grabbed that code from the Vega Lite gallery and was able to modify it. And so again, then we're doing a lookup there where, I'm saying, hey, like, what's the go and grab the value. So at any point here, what's the value from wherever my index is, where I clicked, and use that in this calculation to get my relative % difference from wherever the mouse click is, right? And this is all happening very fast inside the visual. It's not issuing new DAX queries, all that kind of stuff. So I won't go any more than that, but just making the point of these in-visual calculations. To do a simpler example, but this also shows the performance part. This is two visuals. It's just looking at total sales by day, the blue trace, and then there's a 7-day running average in the red trace. And this is an import model, so all the data is loaded in the model. But you can imagine if this was a direct query, if I were to make a visual with just the blue trace, it would be very fast. But to do the red trace, if I just show you the measure behind this thing, I apologize for not formatting it. But, I'd have to do this more advanced calculate expression where I'm saying, hey, I want to first change the scope, grab whatever the date I am, and then set a date range between this date and 6 days ago. So I get my 7-day average, and then average, calculate total sales over each of those days and then average those all up. And that gives me my 7-day running average. And as you can imagine, running that is a little slower, right? Doing those, the calculate context transition, all that, it's going to slow down your query. But if I could only get away with doing just get the daily value, that might be a much faster query. And indeed, the one on the right is the Deneb version of this. Looks very similar, and all I've got is the date field and the total sales measure, which is just a simple sum measure, so it's very performant. And I can go in here and I look at the Vega spec, and again, I'm just doing a calculated field here where I'm calculating this 7-day running average, where I'm using the window function again. In this case, I'm saying, hey, I want to look at some other data. I want to do an average of the total sales value. This is what I'm going to call my, calculated column in the data. Then I can use this frame functionality to define the window that I want to look over. So I want to say, hey, from wherever I am, I want to go back 6 values and a head 0 values, and that gives me my 7 days that I want to average over. And then it's just typical, Vega Lite stuff to make the chart. But again, using this 7DA, this column I've calculated inside the visual to do that. And again, this is an import model, and it's already significantly faster. If we do Performance Analyzer and look at these things, it's 101 milliseconds to do the native visual with this approach. With the more advanced measure, it's only 4 milliseconds to do the one on the right, because again, I'm only doing the simple total. And if I were to take the complex measure out of this one, it returns in the same amount of time, because it's the exact same query, just the date and the total sales measure. All right, so this is speeding up a single visual, but you can also speed up entire report pages. So if you've built many Power BI reports, if I click on this, you can see all these little spinnies. This is a really small set of data, a couple hundred rows of data, but I intentionally made a whole lot of visuals here. I've got a card visual, a multi-card visual, and then this line chart. And you saw that it was pretty slow. And again, if this was against a big data model or direct query, it could be painfully slow, right? So when we help people that have slow report pages, it could be for a number of reasons, but your report design can be one of them. So the first thing you should consider is there a better way I can do this with the native visuals, right? And so now if I look at this one, this is just a matrix visual. This has all the same information as the previous page, and I've added a spark line here to show me the time trend. I can do conditional formatting on this measure here, and of course this is very fast because it's a single visual. But if you say, hey, you know what, I really needed that better performance, you saw how quickly that came up. This is, again, a more complex visual to build for sure, but if you really need it, it's worth it to get the performance, where I'm using multiple things here, where I'm layering multiple things together. I'm repeating this over multiple things, and I'm using the vconcat, where I'm actually building, this is one visual, right? And then this is a second, I think this is a third, or maybe it's just 1 and 2. But vconcating these two independent visuals together, they're all using related data, so that's why it runs in a performant way. And then I'm repeating it for all these different categories or measures, right? Again, if you really do need a complex or dense report page, the more you can consolidate things into a smaller number of visuals, the better performance you're going to have. All right. I did want to show one R example, and again, I'm a scientist, so worked with scientists and engineers that needed to do more advanced calculations. And hey, I love all the Power BI stuff, what I can do with Power Query, the data modeling stuff and all the simple DAX. But what if I need to do some more advanced stuff? And this is kind of an extreme example, but I'm nerdy, so I thought this was really cool. This is just an example. This is something called the Mandelbrot set. And I didn't know about it until I saw someone post about it, a couple of months ago. But it's just a mathematical thing that has some really interesting features over these X and Y ranges. And people do whole dissertations on this. You can drill in and just keep seeing these unique features. But it's a recursive calculation. So it's calculation intensive, and you couldn't really do it in DAX. I was able to do it in Power Query, but the R approach is more performant and more flexible. So in this case, I'm passing, all I'm using Power BI for is to pass these ranges in and the number of points within each range over to the R visual. And then I found some R code online and copied and pasted it in and modified it. This is where it's doing that recursive calculation and all that. So again, nobody would really need a report page like this, but it just shows you can pass data off to other things to R and Python and do stuff there. So I'll just show you. I bookmarked a couple of these. This is what the whole data set looks like when you're zoomed all the way out. And I think I probably showed you Zoom 2. But again, there's all sorts of features you can explore with this and see cool stuff. So again, it's just nerdy fun. So, all right. So I see we've got about 14 minutes left. I can show some Charticulator content as well, but I thought I would pause there and see if there's any questions from people. I've been talking nonstop for a while.
I say move on. This is awesome.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have a question?
Pat, quick question. Is this something you normally help your users from the Power BI CAD team, like questions about using these visuals? Is something that you go and help them with, or this is just something you're just learning on your own and trying to expand on Power BI expertise?
Sure. Well, this is something I was passionate about and learned about prior to joining Microsoft. And so prior to that, I did help a number of people convert from other products that may be more expensive, but may be better at certain aspects of visualization. So I definitely used it then. And since joining the team, we're helping, large customers, troubleshoot things, and usually often it's performance related. And so there's a lot of things we would look at before we would go down this road, right? So you'd look at the modeling and the DAX and the source and the gateway, and so there's lots of other things that contribute. But if we saw a report page that was really dense, and if we isolated their performance issue to, hey, this report page is really dense, right? Then we would pursue small multiples of some kind, right? Or a complete overhaul in design to improve performance. And more recently, if I see someone like this doing direct query, I will start to consider this Deneb approach of, hey, here's a visual, we can make it a different way. It looks the same, but it'll be way more performant because you're issuing a smaller number or much simpler queries for your source to handle. So again, it's not the first tool I would use with a customer, but more often it's becoming one of the later ones I'll talk to them about.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, and then Charticulator. So with Charticulator, it's really kind of a neat build experience. I've seen people get, even though on that spectrum I showed, Charticulator is lower than Deneb, I've had people say, I'm confused by Charticulator and it was just as hard for me to learn as Deneb, right? So, you have to try it out for yourself and see what you think. But here's just a few examples. But if I just do like a simple chart here, so I've added, product and total quantity just to show you what the interface looks like when you go to build. So you have to add at least one field or measure to have this activate here, and then you go to edit. And you can look from sample templates. If someone else built something that looks really good, you could import the template file that they send you. But usually you're going to go and create a chart here. All right, so this is what the interface looks like. And so you sort of have your plot segment over here, and then you have what's called your glyph over here. And the glyph is basically the visual representation of every row of data. And so let's say, again, sorry to make you see all just bar charts, but it is the easiest one to demo. So if I just drag a rectangle here, you'll notice that there's these dotted lines that are the guidelines. And in Charticulator, everything's relative. So you're binding things to different things, and then it works it all out and then renders the visual there. So in this case, I've said, okay, I want to have a bar represent every row of data. And then once that's there, you can come over here to your plot segment. You can say, no, I'd rather be stack Y, or I can, do a grid, that kind of stuff. All right. And then you can say, okay, well, I can zoom in and out. I can pin this window and move it around, that kind of stuff. But I could say, hey, I want to take this total quantity and I want to map it to the height of each bar, right? And you can see the heights change there. And so now and if you look at the shape here, you're just how you build, and you can even collapse this if you want to make space. you click on each thing and then you can see the properties for the attributes for that down below. And so now you can see that I've bound the height of the bar to that measure. And I could have done it this way as well, right? As well. And again, there's style things and colors, and you can bind, if I wanted to, color stuff by product, I could do that kind of thing. And then I can just keep adding. If I go back to the glyph and I'll zoom in, say I wanted to add a text mark to it, I can, click on the text and bring that, and notice those yellow lines. I want to bind it somewhere. So I want to bind it to the bottom, right? And I'll put it right there. And then I've got this text, and I can zoom in, and I want it to be a little higher. And in fact, I wanted to rotate it, move it up a little bit, and then, I can I can collapse this for a minute, and then I could bind the text to my product, right? And then I could make it bigger and do all that kind of stuff. I can change the color of it, and then if I wanted another text label, I can put it here, and in the glyph, and bind it to the top of it as well. And you can, there's tons you can do. You can even do nested visuals. So if you need small multiples, you can actually insert another chart as a glyph element, and then you can go in and edit the nested chart in the same kind of interface that you see here, and that kind of stuff. And you can also play with different scaffolds. So if I wanted a polar, then I could do a polar type of chart. And this is one of the things you'll figure out quickly with Charticulator is you do something, and you can do a quick undo. Right here, I can undo what I did. But often you'll go, you know what, I'm just going to start from scratch. And the build experience is so fast in Charticulator that you can iterate real quickly, and that's how you learn. I've trashed so many visuals on my way to making the one that I did, and now I have a better rate of right first time. But the build experience is very fast. So sometimes you just go, forget it, I'm going to start from scratch and try building it another way. You can also do a data axis here, so you can add a data axis to as well to scale stuff. So if you need to have like a side by side, or like a clustered column chart, and they need to be for different measures, you can have two different scales for each bar, so that one isn't really small and one is really big, that kind of stuff. So this is what the build experience looks like. Again, you can add images, shapes. You can also do some basic aggregations in the visual as well. So I can filter or group by things, and then choose the aggregation that I want to do, some or whatever. And again, you typically would do that with your stacks or the fields you add. But again, if you were going to do two visuals, you could build side by side visuals, and again speed things up because I'm making two visuals, and again one could be an aggregate and one not, so you have the higher granularity over here and the summary over here, kind of thing. You could build 4 charts. You can add more guidelines and do lots more things as well. And there's a few scenarios where you need to build to add guides so that you have more things to snap to, basically, so that it can position everything relative to each other. So, but similar to what I showed before, you can use measures on the axis. This is an example with the side-by-side bars where I've got 2 different data axes inside the glyph to map the space, to bind the heights of each bar to. And then these 2 are just similar kind of thing, just showing a measure on an axis, so very similar to what I showed before. And then this is the matrix visual as well, where again you can get that experience of changing the size of things. With both Deneb and this, you're fixing the size of the text, but in some cases I've written measures before that looks at the length of the string and then dynamically calculates a font size. So you can have a dynamic font size as well. Say if you had, say a stack bar chart and some of the names are really long or short, you could dynamically size the font as well. So, all right. So that's all the demo I had. I see we just got a few minutes left, so I'll open it back up for questions.
How do you manage, Pat, the actual code within these? Are you going out to like a GitHub repo or like an Azure repo to actually save some of the JSON if you're going through like Rev Control?
There are some people out there that have started like GitHub repos for this. I haven't done that. You know, it's all just been, you know, email, SharePoint, whatever, you know, here's the JSON spec for that, or, you know, put it in a Teams chat or whatever. And then because usually they're going to modify it for some reason and go. So you could do what you're talking about, but I haven't needed to date.
Thank you.
Yep. I see a question in the chat. Yeah, there's currently no plans to stop Charticulator. They just said they're not going to develop it further, and it's currently working fine, and you can still do a ton with it. So I definitely wouldn't avoid using it because of that. So. I still like it again, but I've shown a bunch of people Deneb and Charticulator. They tend to lean towards Deneb, and with this announcement, that probably will make people lean a little harder. But there are some things that, not that one, that Charticulator does better, like these links here, right? Deneb also supports Vega, not just Vega Lite, and you can imagine Vega is a little more code intensive than Vega Lite. It's still not too bad. I've done a couple of things with Vega or borrowed code from people that are doing Vega. But these kinds of, you know, links here, you know, this is one, the, you know, characters that interact with each other in Les Mis. Charticulator has this links functionality just out of the box, and it's really easy. So if you need a chart that does this kind of functionality, I absolutely would go to Charticulator. This, you couldn't do it, or you couldn't do it without Vega in Deneb. And I don't think you can do it in Plotly.js. And again, maybe you'll find an AppSource visual that does that kind of thing for you. But for links, it's Charticulator for sure. Okay. All right. Well, I see we're about at time, so I'll thank everybody for their attention. Hopefully these are useful to you, and you can add them to your toolbox and help whoever your customers are get to insights a little more easily.
This was great, Pat. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, everyone.
Maggie,
Thank
will the video be made available to us?
Yes, it will. And then Pat, you can share the presentation, and I can add that with the links also to the user group files thing.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll email you the PowerPoint and the PBIX file.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.